Good morning and welcome to the program. I'm your host, George Rideout, and as always, working the soundboard is Lynn. And today is kind of a special day for us here in studio because, I'll read something first. I'll get to the reason why I'm reading it this morning after I've read it. So here it goes. This is called The Invitation by Oriah Mountain Dreamer. The Invitation. It doesn't interest me what you do for a living. I want to know what you ache for, and if you dare to dream of meeting your heart's longing. It doesn't interest me how old you are. I want to know if you will risk looking like a fool for love, for your dreams, for the adventure of being alive. It doesn't interest me what planets are squaring your moon. I want to know if you have touched the center of your own sorrow, if you have been opened by life's betrayals, or have become shriveled and closed from fear of further pain. I want to know if you can sit with pain, mine or your own, without moving to hide it, or fade it, or fix it. I want to know if you can be with joy, mine or your own, if you can dance with wildness and let the ecstasy fill you to the tips of your fingers and toes without cautioning us to be careful, be realistic, or to remember the limitations of being a human. It doesn't interest me if the story you are telling me is true. I want to know if you can disappoint another to be true to yourself, if you can bear the accusation of betrayal and not betray your own soul. I want to know if you can be faithful and therefore be trustworthy. I want to know if you can see beauty even when it is not pretty every day, and if you can source your life from its presence. I want to know if you can live with failure, yours and mine, and still stand on the edge of a lake and shout to the silver of the full moon, yes. It doesn't interest me to know where you live or how much money you have. I want to know if you can get up after a night of grief and despair, weary and bruised to the bone, and do what needs to be done for the children. It doesn't interest me who you are, how you came to be here. I want to know if you will stand in the center of the fire with me and not shrink back. It doesn't interest me where or what or with whom you have studied. I want to know what sustains you from the inside when all else falls away. I want to know if you can be alone with yourself and if you truly like the company you keep in the empty moments. And once again, that's just the awesome poem by Oriah Mountain Dreamer called The Invitation. And those that are regular listeners have heard that a few times. Now, this is interesting because this poem has been copied and shared by thousands around the world through the internet, bulletin boards, workshop readings. The poem has kind of taken on a life of its own. And this is why I'm sitting here trying to keep my mouth closed and not just spit it out, but maybe the writer of that will tell us how this remarkable poem came to be. Welcome to the show, Oriah. Are you there?
I'm here.
Maybe you can tell how this remarkable poem came to be.
Sure. The poem was actually written in 1994, and it was written on the anniversary date of a one-year anniversary of a really quite horrible thing in my life, where a dear friend of mine had had a brain aneurysm burst while she was in my home. Very long story short, she ended up going into a coma for 5 weeks, and we went to the hospital quickly, and she came out of that with severe brain damage, and so it had been quite a traumatic event. And this was a year later, and I had been invited to a party, and I have to say that I don't tend to enjoy large social gatherings, but I sort of pushed myself to go that night, kind of saying, come on, not every moment has to be deeply meaningful. Just go and chat with people. And when I got home from that with my usual disappointment in the level of social conversation when people are sort of chatting and meeting at a party, I sat down and I wrote this poem, really based on a poem and writing exercise that David White, who is a wonderful poet in the U.S., had given out. And his poem starts off, "It doesn't interest me if there's one God or many gods." And he had us do this writing exercise at one point where you keep repeating, "It doesn't interest me, what I really want to know." And I sat down and really bouncing off the party, started to talk about how I wasn't interested in the usual things people share when they're meeting somebody at a party. Reasonable things like, where do you live and what do you do for a living and who do you know, what's your connection to people here, but how I wanted to know something deeper than that. So I wrote that poem, and then the next day I happened to be sending out a newsletter to about 500 people who were on my mailing list because they had come to do workshops on meditation and ceremony and things with me. And after that, I really didn't know what was happening with it because I was on an ancient computer and so really not on the Internet. And those folks, just sort of privately, nothing coordinated, started sharing that poem. So by the time I got on the Internet 2 years later, there were hundreds of thousands of sites on the Internet with the poem on it, some of them having been creatively edited, some of them attributing all kinds of odd things to who I was, but there it was.
What a thing to wake up to.
Yeah, it was quite strange.
What kind of changes did that bring with it?
Well, I had, once I got on the Internet, I started hearing from people, and I started hearing how the poem was being used in a multitude of places. Weddings and funerals and graduations. It was read at a UN gathering. It was just the most bizarre thing. And I had written a book in 1990 that had been published in 1990 called Confessions of a Spiritual Thrill Seeker, about my apprenticeship with a shaman and leaving of that same shaman. And I had a lot of writing that I had done in the 10 years sort of in between and wasn't quite sure how to shape it into a new book. So one of the things that happened was Jean Houston, who's written all kinds of books. At that point, she'd written 33. I'm sure she's written more since. She wanted to use the poem in a book called Passion for the Possible. So her agent got a hold of me for permission. And when he did, he said to me, have you thought about writing a book based on this poem? And it sort of clicked when he said it, that the poem was a structure for a lot of the writing I'd been doing. And he became my agent and consequently sold that book to HarperCollins, and things went from there.
Wow, what an amazing journey.
Yeah, just an incredible gift, really.
Yeah, that's really when first thing that came to mind was when you live in the present, it truly is a gift.
I mean, the funny thing about the poem is that I didn't, that was the first draft. I didn't edit it at all. If had I known so many people were going to read it, I'm sure I would have mucked around with it.
Oriah, it's Lynn.
Hi, Lynn.
Hi there. I just wanted to say this is such an amazing thing. Not only your poem, but I was in a doctor's office it was a couple of years ago, and reading a magazine article on that book that you just mentioned, The Thrill Seeker.
Yes.
Was too caught up to tear the page out and take it home.
Right.
So, and I've never known who wrote it.
Oh, interesting.
And you've now told me, so I am going to go searching. So thank you.
It's cool how those little things work out.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the person for a while. Now, I did so much reading last night, so I may just kind of jump from place to place with questions that came to mind as I was reading. As you say, you are first and foremost a storyteller. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you come to Spirit, or were you always walking hand in hand with Spirit?
I would say it's been a pretty constant in my life. When I was a very weird young child, and I was raised in a very non-dogmatic Christian household. We went to church. My parents had come from two different Protestant churches, and we ended up going to a third. But it was a very open, certainly that sense of Spirit was at the center of life, but it was quite non-dogmatic in terms of, it was certainly Christian, but not sort of this is the only way kind of thing. So I grew up feeling that sort of energy and presence I identified as God or Christ was with me and talking to me. Not giving answers, sadly, but asking questions mostly. But that was very much a sort of presence in my life. And I also grew up in northern Ontario, very close to wilderness, and so my sense of Spirit was very much connected to the natural environment and wilderness. So from those two things, it became, in a sense, a natural progression that many years later, when I was 30 and very, very ill with chronic fatigue syndrome, we didn't know that at the time, that one of the places I went in sheer desperation was to a shaman who did healings. And I felt very comfortable in the ceremonial context of going out alone in the wilderness, because that was a place where I had always felt spirit. And so I both had a healing with him, but I began to learn about a form of spirituality that was very much earth-based, that appealed to me a great deal and seemed not at all contradictory to what I had intuitively known or what I had been taught as a child.
Yeah, most definitely. There's a few similarities. I grew up in southern Ontario, around the London and Norwich area. When I was 12, I guess my first mentor came into my life. But through him, and I told the story just, I think, last week when I had the rabbi on, so I won't go through the whole story. But got in touch through dream. Actually, I had dreamt to these people the night before, and then the next night, walking into the fairgrounds where this gathering was, I ended up meeting the 7 people I dreamt of the night before.
Oh, lovely.
It was so awesome, and it started me off on this journey that still to this day, those that are still alive.
Right. I should say, that dreaming has always been a very strong part of my own spiritual journey. And one of the reasons I went to see the shaman I did for the healing is I had been dreaming of a group of old women that I called the grandmothers for a long time. And it's funny, I had seen a notice about this particular shaman, and who I won't be naming. And the first year, and I was ill for a few years, I kind of thought, I don't know, that looks a little weird. And the second year, the grandmother said to me, go to him now, go to see him. And that proved to be the beginning of a sort of whole new journey. In the shamanic tradition I was trained in, there are dreamers and stalker dreamers and dreamer stalkers, and I'm a dreamer.
I can totally relate. I'm the same. I consider myself a dreamer, and have done a fair bit of stalking in my youth, but am definitely a dreamer, and was with Billy. Billy Mazer was the old guy that I used to run with, and who's passed on now, and was for a short time. Because of the dreaming, became kind of like a seer, because I could see things in those dreams.